such cylinders, has as completely superseded handwork as did the application of machinery to the spinning and weaving of cotton, and these new arrangements in the printing works have superseded the handworkers much more than was the case in the production of the fabrics. One man, with the assistance of one child, now does with a machine the work done formerly by 200 block printers. A single machine yields 28 yards of printed cloth per minute. The calico printers are in a very bad way in consequence. The shires of Lancaster, Derby, and Chester produced, according to a petition of the printers to the House of Commons, in the year 1842, 11 million pieces of printed cotton goods. Of these, 100,000 were printed by hand exclusively, 900,000 in part with machinery, and in part by hand, and 10 million by machinery alone, with 4 to 6 colors. As the machinery is chiefly new, and undergoes constant improvement, the number of hand printers is far too great for the available quantity of work, and many of them are therefore starving. The petition puts the number at 1/4 of the whole, while the rest are employed but 1 or 2, in the best case 3 days in the week, and are ill paid. Leach 194 asserts of one print work Deeply Dale, near Bury, in Lancashire, that the hand printers did not earn on an average more than 5 shillings, though he knows that the machine printers were pretty well paid. The print works are thus wholly affiliated with the factory system, but without being subject to the legislative restrictions placed upon it. They produce an article subject to fashion, and have therefore no regular work. If they have small orders, they work half-time. If they make a hit with the pattern, and business is brisk, they work 12 hours, perhaps all night. In the neighbourhood of my home, near Manchester, there was a print work that was often lighted when I returned late at night, and I have heard that the children were obliged at times to work so long there that they would try to catch a moment's rest and sleep on the stone steps and in the corners of the lobby. I have no legal proof of the truth of the statement, or I should name the firm. The report of the Children's Employment Commission is very cursory upon this subject, stating merely that in England, at least, the children are mostly pretty well clothed and fed relatively, according to the wages of the parents, that they receive no education whatsoever, and are morally on a low plane. It is only necessary to remember that these children are subject to the factory system, and then, referring the reader to what has already been said of that, we can pass on. Of the remaining workers employed in the manufacture of clothing stuffs little remains to be said. The bleachers' work is very unwholesome, obliging them to breathe chlorine, a gas injurious to the lungs. The work of the dyers is in many cases very healthful, since it requires the exertion of the whole body. How these workers are paid is little known, and this is ground enough for the inference that they do not receive less than the average wages, otherwise they would make complaint. The fustian cutters, who, in consequence of the large consumption of cotton velvet, are comparatively numerous, being estimated at from 3,000 to 4,000, have suffered very severely, indirectly, from the influence of the factory system. The goods formerly woven with hand looms were not perfectly uniform, and required a practiced hand in cutting the single rows of threads. Since power looms have been used, the rows run regularly, each thread of the weft is exactly parallel with the preceding one, and cutting is no longer an art. The workers thrown out of employment by the introduction of machinery turned to fustian cutting, and forced down wages by their competition. The manufacturers discovered that they could employ women and children, and the wages sank to the rate paid them, while hundreds of men were thrown out of employment. The manufacturers found that they could get the work done in the factory itself more cheaply than in the cutter's workroom, for which they indirectly paid the rent. Since this discovery, the low upper-story cutter's rooms stand empty in many a cottage, or are let for dwellings, while the cutter has lost his freedom of choice of his working hours, and is brought under the dominion of the factory bell. A cutter of perhaps 45 years of age told me that he could remember a time when he had received 8d a yard for work, for which he now received 1d. True, he can cut the more regular texture more quickly than the old, but he can by no means do twice as much in an hour as formerly, so that his wages have sunk to less than a quarter of what they were. Leach 196 gives a list of wages paid in 1827, and in 1843 for various goods, from which it appears that articles paid in 1827 at the rates of 4d, 2.25d, 2.75d, and 1d per yard, were paid in 1843 at the rate of 1.5d, 1d, 0.75d, and 0.375d per yard. Cutters' wages. The average weekly wage, according to Leach, was as follows: 1827, £1 66d, £1 26d, £1, £1 66d, and for the same goods in 1843, 10 6d, 7 6d, 6 8d, 10s, while there are hundreds of workers who cannot find employment even at these last named rates. Of the hand weavers of the cotton industry we have already spoken. The other woven fabrics are almost exclusively produced on hand looms. Here most of the workers have suffered as the weavers have done from the crowding in of competitors displaced by machinery, and are, moreover, subject like the factory operatives to a severe fine system for bad work. Take, for instance, the silk weavers. Mr. Brocklehurst, one of the largest silk manufacturers in all England, laid before a committee of members of Parliament lists taken from his books, from which it appears that for goods for which he paid wages in 1821 at the rate of 30 shillings, 14 shillings, 3.5 shillings, 0.75 shillings, 1.5 shillings, 10 shillings, he paid in 1839 but 9 shillings, 7.25 shillings, 2.25 shillings, 0.33 shillings, 0.5 shillings, 6.25 shillings, while in this case no improvement in the machinery has taken place. But what Mr. Brocklehurst does, may very well be taken as a standard for all. From the same lists it appears, that the average weekly wage of his weavers, after all deductions, was, in 1821, 16.5s, and, in 1831, but 6 shillings. Since that time wages have fallen still further. Goods which brought in 4 weavers' wages in 1831, bring in but 2.5 pence in 1843 single sarsenets, and a great number of weavers in the country can get work only when they undertake these goods at 1.5 pence. Moreover, they are subject to arbitrary deductions from their wages. Every weaver who receives materials is given a card, on which is usually to be read, that the work is to be returned at a specified hour of the day, that the weaver who cannot work by reason of illness must make the fact known at the office within 3 days, or sickness will not be regarded as an excuse, that it will not be regarded as a sufficient excuse, if the weaver claims to have been obliged to wait for yarn, that for certain faults in the work. If, for example, more wet threads are found within a given space than are prescribed, not less than half the wages will be deducted, and that if the goods should not be ready at the time specified, 1 penny will be deducted for every yard returned. The deductions in accordance with these cards are so considerable that, for instance, a man who comes twice a week to Lee, in Lancashire, to gather up woven goods, brings his employer at least £15 fines every time. He asserts this himself, and he is regarded as one of the most lenient. Such things were formerly settled by arbitration, but as the workers were usually dismissed, if they insisted upon that, the custom has been almost wholly abandoned, and the manufacturer acts arbitrarily as prosecutor, witness, judge, lawgiver, and executive in one person. And if the workman goes to a justice of the peace, the answer is, when you accepted your card you entered upon a contract, and you must abide by it. The case is the same as that of the factory operatives. Besides, the employer obliges the workman to sign a document in which he declares that he agrees to the deductions made. And if a workman rebels, all the manufacturers in the town know at once that he is a man who, as Leach says, 197 resists the lawful order as established by weavers' cards, and, moreover, has the impudence to doubt the wisdom of those who are, as he ought to know, his superiors in society. Naturally, the workers are perfectly free. The manufacturer does not force them to take his materials and his cards, but he says to them what Leach translates into plain English with the words, "If you don't like to be frizzled in my frying pan, you can take a walk into the fire." The silk weavers of London, and especially of Spitalfields, have lived in periodic distress for a long time, and that they still have no cause to be satisfied with their lot is proved by their taking a most active part in English labour movements in general, and in London ones in particular. The distress prevailing among them gave rise to the fever, which broke out in East London, and called forth the Commission for investigating the sanitary condition of the labouring class. But the last report of the London Fever Hospital shows that this disease is still raging. After the textile fabrics, by far the most important products of English industry are the metal wares. This trade has its headquarters at Birmingham, where the finer metal goods of all sorts are produced, at Sheffield for cutlery, and in Staffordshire, especially at Wolverhampton, where the coarser articles, locks, nails, etc.